Today, I want to talk to you about something a little bit controversial. I want to talk to you about what you measure and what you reward. Now, we all like to measure stuff, especially if we're in business. There's so many tools out there, there's so much data, and it's lovely, especially if we're in charge. Because if we're in charge, it gets us a feel of what's going on in the corners, what's going on where we can't see it, what's the big picture. So we measure, we measure, we measure. We love data. We respect people who know data. Data. The more, the better. There's just one problem. We want to be data-driven. Yes, that is true. We want it to be, we want the numbers to guide us. We want to be rational. We want to look at what's worked. We want to do things right. We want to use proven metrics, and successes are built on data. Have you heard the term data-driven? Data-driven marketing. We're a data-driven company, data-driven design, data-driven this and data-driven that. It's all over the bloody place. We all want to be data-driven. And no wonder, because if you're not data-driven, you're treated like this guy. Sure, he might be fun to bring to the office Christmas party. Sure, he might be creative, and if you want some good ideas for some sort of tacky slogan for your website, he's the guy you go to. But nobody's going to put him in charge of the finances. Nobody's going to let him have the final say over your decision. This is what you're treated like if you go into a room and say, not a big fan of data-driven. I don't think we should make our decisions based on data. That's how they'll see you. I know, I've been that guy. Now, I love data as much as the next person, but I've been that guy. And that look, it's like heresy. It's like heresy. It's heretical. It's like, no, what are you suggesting? Are you an idiot? Why do you even say that? We're having goosebumps in the bad way. Nobody wants to be that guy. Now, there's just one problem. Data, numbers, data-driven, it's great in a stable world. It's great when yesterday looks like tomorrow, or when tomorrow looks like yesterday, perhaps more properly, more correctly at least. The trouble is we live in a VUCA world. VUCA, if you don't know the term, it's very simple: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. If I remember correctly, it's something that comes from the U.S. Army, but I'm not completely certain about that. The reality is the world is crazy. It's complex, it's wild, it's ever-changing. I think this is recorded during Corona lockdown in 2021, and I think anyone who's seeing this, like even close to when it's recorded, will say, yeah, pretty uncertain, pretty volatile, pretty complex, pretty ambiguous world we live in. Now that data, that measurement, that rewarding, what does that have to do with this VUCA thing? Why are we talking about this? Why am I talking about this? Well, it has a lot to do with it, because if the world is not stable, then what you measure and what you reward, well, oddly enough, that it doesn't work the way you want it to. Let's take a simple example. This is a really simple example. I know a lot of you out there are thinking, but we don't do email marketing, or I'm not in marketing, or why are you even talking about this? Because it's so bloody simple, and it's a conversation that I've had again and again and again. Also about other things, but also about marketing. And I know this is an innovation keynote, so I'm talking about thinking new, but let's for a moment dial it down. Let's talk about email marketing, and let's talk about rewards and measurements. Now, what do we look at when we have all our beautiful analytics, our Google stuff, and our dashboards, and our data? What do we look at? What do we measure? What do we reward? What do we say to people? Yes, you performed number 1 this year, Olson. You did this and this, and you got this and this score in this category. But what are these numbers we're talking about? What is it we actually measure? Well, we could measure the number of people who open the mail. We're doing an email marketing campaign. It's very simple. We send out to some sort of database, newsletter, whatever we have, previous customers maybe, and we could check how many people open the mail. Is it 50%? Is it 4%? Is it 98%? Obviously, a higher number is better, right? Because if more people open the mail, then it must be a better mail, or we're happier. So that's one thing to measure. It's an obvious one. So we could also figure out who read the mail. There's tons of software that can track all sorts of insidious stuff these days. especially if you're kind of in league with one of the big companies like Google or Facebook or Amazon or that sort of thing. But even for mere mortals, even for the small startups, there's tons of data tracking stuff. Now, measuring who opened the mail but didn't read it, that's also interesting, right? Maybe 50% opened your mail, but only 2% read it. Then it must be a lousy mail, right? Maybe. At least it's a thing you could measure. What if there are people who click the call to action? Click here to learn more. Click here to buy the vacation. Click here to book a call about our services. Some sort of CTA, some sort of call to action. How many people actually did that? Again, was it 50%? Was it 4%? Was it 2% of the 4% of the 50% if we're going through the funnel that way? How many people did that? What's success? What are we measured by? Do I get a bonus in the marketing department if it's 2% of the 4% of the 50%? Or what if it's 50% of the 2% of the 6%? These numbers matter because people's careers depend on them. Business decisions, leadership decisions are made because of these numbers. Is this what we should measure? We could measure how many people actually buy something. Sure, they click the call to action, but did they then get to the website or the sign up function or the ticketing service? And did they then think, ooh, it said sign up here to get a webinar with world famous innovation strategist Claus? And then they clicked, yes, I want that. Who wouldn't, right? But what if it then says it cost $8,000? They're like, okay, I click the call to action. I'm not clicking the buy button. Now, what if we're thinking, maybe they don't click it right now, but in a week when they see all their friends are going, maybe they buy then. Does it still count as failed? Do they need to buy immediately? Okay, I'm not going to sidetrack. Let's just say this is also a thing you could measure, not the people who buy right now, but the people who buy later. It's an obvious thing to measure. It's a little bit harder, but it's still doable. Now, what if we're measuring the people who write to us, people who said, I saw your email campaign. It was very interesting. I would like to know more. Instead of just clicking on some sort of button, we encourage them to kind of to reach out to us, to have a personal moment, to write to George. George seems like a good guy to write to. What if the call to action is write an email to George? Not click a button, but write an email to George. Is that different? Do we measure it the same way? Is it better? What if people write to us if they're not supposed to? Do we measure that? What if they write about us, if they share news on us on LinkedIn or on Facebook or comment on Snapchat or Instagram or TikTok or whatever is out there? There's plenty you could measure. Is that good? Is it bad? What if it's a mail that was only opened by 1%, but all of those 1%, they all wrote about us on LinkedIn? Maybe that's good. Maybe that's bad. It's definitely measurable, right? What if it's people who quote us? What if it's people who talk, not just write about us, but who say, hey, in this mail, I got this thing, and I'm now going to tell you about it? Is that what we measure? The thing is, we could also measure the people who now hate us. Look at how many people are giving us unjust one-star reviews while never having used our product. How many people are writing scathing stuff about us in online magazines or on blogs or so on. Maybe that's a thing we track. Maybe we're successful if we're hated. There are people out there who definitely track their success by how many people disagree with what they say. These are things we could measure. We could reward each of these, or all of them, or some of them, or some sort of combination. We could give bonuses, we could give vacation days, we could give promotions. We could give lunches with the boss or trips to Mali. I think I'd prefer the last one, but now, this is just people reactions. What about the rest? There's tons of stuff you can measure. There's so much data out there and so available in a way it's never been before. And, well, we can probably say in 5 years exactly the same words and they'll be even more true than they are now. There's so much data out there. It's so tempting to measure it. It's so tempting to judge by the data because data can't lie, right? Can't lie. And this reminds me, before I go on, of one of my favorite jokes of my stepfather's. Now, my stepfather is a professor of computer science, and that means he's a little bit on the geeky side, one might say. And he's got a lot of bad jokes. I grew up in a household where there were good jokes and there were bad jokes. But one of them has always struck me as brilliant, and I quote him on it whenever the chance is there, and it is there right now. He says, so if you look at statistics, which can't lie, of course, because that's the assumption here, and if you want to go on a plane and you're worried that somebody will bring a bomb, then what do? Because it's a real threat, right? You go on a plane, somebody could bring a bomb. It has happened. It's a real thing. There's a statistical chance that somebody brings a bomb. My stepfather's solution? Bring your own bomb. Because the chances of 2 people having a bomb on a plane are so much smaller. Yes, there's a chance of 1 person, but statistically the chance of 2 people on the same plane having a bomb are ridiculously small. Small chance, much, much smaller chance. Now, of course, reality doesn't work like that, and he knows. My stepfather knows this very well, which is why, of course, the joke is there. Did you like it as much as I did? I can't gauge your reaction. I can't measure it because I'm just talking to a camera here. So I can't measure it. I can't reward it. That's okay. I can still tell it. Okay, back to what we're talking about. Back to the rest. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how this sort of measuring and rewarding goes terribly wrong or terribly right, depending on how you look at it. So the first of this, and I'm not going to mention where this happened because it's a little bit of a dicey thing, is trying to get doctors to improve their waiting times. So the goal was set, we should measure doctors on how many patients they take in for consultations the day after the patient has called them. The day after the patient has made an appointment, how many get actually into to see the doctor. So I'm supposed to call on Tuesday and say, hello, doctor, can you see me? My life is terrible for some odd reason. I'd like to see you. And if the doctor says, yes, I can see you tomorrow, that counts as a plus in the book. If he says, no, I can see you next Wednesday, that's a minus. Okay, very good idea. Fast waiting times. Everybody's happy. What happened? As you can guess, the human factor slipped in through the back door. And what happened was a lot of these doctors said, oh, it's great, Ray, it's great. Call me again on next Tuesday. Okay, great, I'll call you next Tuesday. Hello, this is Dr. Sanchez. It's now next Tuesday. How can I help you? Yeah, it's Claus from last week. My life is still terrible. Can I come in? Yes, I'd love to see you tomorrow, Claus. What happened? Dr. Sanchez, the smart Dr. Sanchez, suddenly got an appointment in the plus box because it was next day, right? If he'd made the appointment when I originally called, he would be in the minus box. But since he was being measured, probably also rewarded for getting appointments in one day after, of course he dodged the system like this. And who can blame him? The Japanese police. I've talked to people in kind of policing as a profession, and one of them laughed a little bit, and I got the stories later, like corroborated by other sources, and said, yeah, the Japanese police are legendary for having one of the highest crime-solving rates in the world. And the first time you learn of that, you think like, wow, what do they do? How are they so good? Of course, why wouldn't you? And then he said, well, then you start looking at it, then you figure out, once you've talked to some Japanese policemen, it's because they apparently, again, I don't have this is not something they're saying themselves, but apparently, according to a guy who was actually an expert in this sort of thing, and who knew, seemed what he was talking about, said they only take on cases that they're sure they can solve. Oh, so it means they don't open a case if they're not pretty damn sure they can solve it. That must lead to a high solution rate. And voila, it does. So if you're measured by how many things you do right, but you decide when you're opening a case, which the police does, they have to, kind of just for time and efficiency and all that sort of thing. Of course they can't open cases on anything. Apparently the Japanese police have been smart enough to say, we're not going to open a case unless we're pretty sure we can solve it. That leads to a high solution rate, which leads to people saying, oh, they're a really great police force. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But that number, when you kind of scratch at the surface, doesn't really prove it too much. And to stay in Japan, but go back historically, quite a number of years, to the Second World War. This is a dark example, but it really, really proves a point. When the Japanese started using kamikaze pilots, I think it's called toko in Japanese, correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea that you got into a plane, you got the white scarf around your head, and you said, I'm going to die for the emperor, I'm going to suicide, ram myself into an American carrier warship, whatever. This was a thing that happened at the latter stages of the war in the Pacific. Gruesome, brutal, but very much real. Now, apparently, when the Japanese started doing this, what they would do was they would line up the pilots, because it was pilots, they were flying planes, and they would say, okay, who here among all of you is willing to take that extra step and die for the emperor and fly in a kamikaze mission? Take a step forward. And then some would take a step forward, and others would cheer them and say, oh, you are so brave, and your souls will kind of be remembered, all that sort of thing. And they went on and flew these terrible missions, and they died, most of them. Then at some point, they realized we need more kamikaze pilots. How do you fix that? Well, you do it very simply. You change the reward system. And right now, here's Saga. And Saga is at an age where she doesn't really measure that much. Saga, we're just going to take you in the picture. Here's Saga. Saga doesn't measure that much, but she does reward. And right now, I'm not being measured or rewarded by the number of videos I produce. I'm being measured and rewarded, especially in this case, rewarded for spending time with my daughter. And I'm not doing that when I'm recording this video. So I'm going to end it pretty fast. Now, at the end of the war, they decided we need more kamikaze pilots. So they said, anybody who's not willing to die for the emperor as a kamikaze pilot, step forward. And then they were booed and disrespected and all that sort of thing. Mechanisms changed from opt-in to opt out. And that meant, oddly enough, the amount grew. So, what should we do? I'm still just watching her. She's right now not destroying anything. She's out of frame, but still very much there. What should we do? Det en lille tips. We should look to this guy. We should look to... Saga, kan du lige til stille et øjeblik? Bare meget kort. We should look to this guy. We should look to Sir John Cowperwaith. And I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. He was... I can't remember his precise title. He was the financial secretary of Hong Kong from 1961 to 1971. Nej, du skal være stille. Jeg skal lige snakke. And he said, virtually no economic use for national accounts, partly because we cannot be in control of our economy and partly because our economy has a dynamism which outpaces such accounts. He forbade the gathering of economic data because he was afraid that it would hamper the growth of Hong Kong. And he's widely credited for part of Hong Kong's economic growth. And the reason things are a little bit chaotic is because Saga's still here, and she's right now rewarding me, or doing the exact opposite, punishing me for prioritizing my recording instead of her. Such is Corona life. Saga, jeg skal lige blive færdig, så er der. Giv mig 1 minut. 1 minute. You should look to him. Research him. What he said was, don't collect economic data. Don't measure, because the economy is better if we don't try to interfere. I've said, because I'm this guy, being guided by numbers only makes sense when tomorrow looks like yesterday. Right now, tomorrow does not look like yesterday at all, because we're in a crazy crisis. So it means be careful what you measure. Be careful what you reward. And especially, okay, I had that on 2 slides, but my concentration slipped a little bit because of the daughter stuff. So if you're measuring me for how many slip-ups I made in this video, how much I got distracted by my my offspring, yeah, then I don't think I scored that well. And that means it's time to say goodbye.